My name is Kojo Idrissa. At least I recognize at least one face out there. So if you have seen me before, it is probably in relation to some sort of a Django Con group. Nope. I see someone in the chat says nope. So my name is Kojo Idrissa. I'm a software engineer at a company called RevSys. And oh, let me just do another audio check here. Make sure everyone can hear me. Can everyone hear me all right? Yep, thumbs up. Okay. All
You're
right.
just fine.
Thank you. So I'm a software engineer for a company called RevSys, and we do the short version is we build things in Django for people. We do a number of other things. We're a consultancy. If you have seen me before or heard of me before, it is probably in some capacity related to DjangoCon US. I've been a DjangoCon US organizer since 2016. I am also the DEFNA North American ambassador. DEFNA is the Django Events Foundation North America. That is the nonprofit that puts on DjangoCon US. And in that role as the DEFNA North American ambassador, I sort of have traveled around North America giving talks at multiple conferences and also talking to people, talking to different conference organizers about the fact that DjangoCon US will move from city to city. And so if you wanted DjangoCon US to be in your city, then you could submit a CFP for that. And there will be more detail about that coming in the next year or so. As again, many things with conferences, especially here in 2020, have changed and altered and shifted. But that's who I am, and that's why you may or may not recognize me. But today we're here to talk about Django, and so let me share my screen. Let's see. My screen share going. So I want desktop one. I think I want this desktop. And wait a minute. Okay, I don't want it recording. Okay. Let's see. That's what I want. Hold on, let me move you all off this screen. Share desktop. There we go. Let's see. Calvin, do you all need me to be recording on my end or no? Oh, okay. All right. I'm just going to deny that then. And all right. So hopefully you all should be able to see my screen. You see code on the left and a terminal on the right. All right. Let me do this. Okay. And let me also make this a little bit bigger. Try to shuffle things around, get the appropriate visual set up. So, so what you see on the left here is sort of what a base Django project is going to look like. I'm not sure how many folks are planning to sort of try to follow along at home versus just sort of observing me. So I'll be, I decided instead of having a bunch of slides, we'll mostly be going through code, looking at code and showing some of the results of that code. And so I decided that might be more useful, more instructive than just having people look at slides. So let's see. So if you've gotten Django successfully configured and running, this is what you should see. You should see the what's known as the rocket screen. And so I put up instructions last night in the track 1 channel for people who wanted to follow along. Let me just let me fix that. That's what I want. Should you just get by show of hands, how many people was there anyone who had any trouble getting things set up? Anyone who had trouble with getting Python installed? I see, Mark, getting Python installed, getting virtual environments going, that sort of thing. Mark, where did you have issues?
You can ignore me. I am command line incompetent.
Okay.
I've worked in Zope for like most of the last 10, 20 years, and
Okay.
all in the browser. I'm not familiar with how to get things set up on the back end. So
Okay.
ignore
All right.
me.
All right. So for you, and just before I move on, I just want to sort of see, was there anyone else? Let me ask this: was there anyone else who wanted to get things set up, who ran into an issue, and maybe we can try to sort of resolve that, or if not, speak now or forever hold your peace, as they say. If not, I'll sort of move along with the assumption that either A, you have things set up as you prefer, or that you're just going to sort of go along for the ride and sort of see how things go. All right. So with that said, hold on, and let me make one adjustment here. I'm going to keep my notes on this separate machine so I can sort of, because I prefer to be able to sort of to see you all. So you all can't see me, but in the screen directly in front of me is you all. I can see you all, so in case there are faces of confusion. But then I've got the screen that I'm sharing to my left and then notes to my right. So just as a basic introduction, because it's difficult to know sort of who is coming from what backgrounds and who has sort of what understanding. So I'll just go through some basic terminology first. So Django itself is what's known as a web application framework. And I usually describe that in sort of in 3 steps. It's web, application, and framework. And so it's something that you use to build applications on the web. Website versus application, that distinction has gotten blurred over the years, but basically a web application is like when you're going to a website, but you're actually doing something there. You're not just reading content from the site. You're actually interacting with it the way you would with a spreadsheet or with a word processor or a web browser. So you're actually doing something there. And as a web application framework, Django is something that lets you build those. So it lets you build sites that do things. Excuse me. And so it's a web application framework. It's written in Python, which is appropriate as you're here at the Python Web Conference. If we were talking about Ruby on Rails, you might be surprised. Like, wait, why is that going on here? Or Laravel or something written in PHP. So again, there are lots of things you can do with the framework. Lots of different things you can build. Some of your favorite applications like Instagram, other things are built in Django. And so what we're going to go through today is going to take us into building a relatively simple application that I feel will give you some fundamentals as far as how to build an application. What are the primary things you need to be focused on if you're trying to build a functional application that will do something that you want it to do, and then also give you some hooks for moving forward. So that's our goal. So step 1 is really creating your Django project. And so in the, so we've got 2 things. So what you see on your screen is, again, what we call the rocket screen. And this tells you you've successfully installed Django. There's a wide set of instructions on how to install Django on the web, so I'm not going to sort of belabor that point too heavily. Those processes of getting Django set up, unless someone has some sort of a specific question. I will point out that the way the way I've set this project up might be a little different from what you've seen before. It's slightly different from the standard Django instructions. So you can see on the right, and actually let's see. This will give you sort of a bit of a look into my project. How visible is that for you all? The text in the terminal, is it too small, too big? It's good? Okay. So what you will see here on the right is the way this project is structured, and I'm sort of highlighting some of it. So there's a little dirty. Let me go to another picture. Normally when you start a Django project, you might have this sort of double nested directory. One of the things that we do, and I think something that's becoming closer to sort of industry best practice, is that your Django project, and let's see, this might be a little neater. Your Django project, and let's see, while we're on it, is the code visible as well for folks? Is that all right? Good size. So if you look here on the left of the screen, I have my directory, which is PWC 2020 Django intro, set up, appropriately named. When I started the project with Django, there's usually a command you would use, Django admin start project, and you give the project a name. One of the things that we do at RevSys, and more people do this, is instead of naming the project my cool application or whatever you're going to name it, we start off by naming it config. And the reason for that is when you start up Django, it creates a certain set of files for you, a directory structure for you that has these files in it, init.py and ASCII settings, URLs, and a WSGI file. Those files are actually sort of the core configuration files for your Django project. And so instead of having them double nested in a directory that has the name of your project and then the name of your project again, we call the project config, and then we will manually move those files up up one level so that config directory is at the root level of your project. And on that note, I guess now's a perfect time to talk about the differences between a project and an app. And so when you're starting Django, you get Django installed, and you'll get this rocket ship page. And with the rocket ship page, this lets you know that you actually have Django installed and it's going. When you start a project with Django, you have two different sort of mental constructs: a project and an app. So you start your project. We started a project, we called it config, and that's your overall Django project. And you might think of that as something, say, like Facebook. Say Facebook is a larger application. I'm sorry, a larger project. And then you have smaller bits of functionality within Facebook. And so you might have Facebook Messenger. I don't use Facebook, and so I'm a little fuzzy there, but I know there's Facebook Messenger, and you can put pictures on your wall, and you can do other things in Facebook. You can, there's Facebook 1 and Facebook 2. So Django overall is this larger project, but then just as with non-web programming, you may want to separate out different bits of functionality, and that's where apps come into play. And so you may see somewhere that you will have Django, you may have like a Django admin or Python manage.py, and then start project, and then start app. And so the start project is going to create your larger overall Django project, but then when you're ready to add specific functionality, that's when you use the start app command, and you'll create a separate app. And so what you see here on the left in my directory structure is that I have this config directory, and it contains all the different configurations for my entire project. And we'll get into some of those in more detail in just a second. But then you'll also see over here that I have this talks directory, and this is the app. And so this is where the primary functionality is going to go. So I've already done the start project and the start app. So as I talk about these different directory structures and the differences between an app and a project, what are we building today? What we're looking at today, what I'll be demonstrating, is an application that, or a simplified version of an application that I have built and have been working on. Let's see. There we go. Mouse. Does that work? So it's a simplified version of an application that I've been working on. to help manage the lightning talks. So as I pointed out, I'm a DjangoCon US organizer. One of the things that I do for DjangoCon US is I organize the lightning talks. And if you've ever been to a conference or to a local meetup, a lightning talk is a 5-minute talk on a topic of relevance. And so I am let's see, for DjangoCon US, I'm the Lightning Talks chair. I am also the Sprints chair and the Orientation chair. And so I wanted to have a simple system to make it easier for people to try to register for Lightning Talks. I think initially we were just doing it on pencil and paper. There are a number of different systems, but I decided to try to build something that would help automate that process and just make things go more smoothly. Also, just to sort of give me some extra reps with Django. I'm one of those people who switched careers. I had been an accountant before I was a software developer. And so, you find different ways to practice different things and to sort of scratch your own itch, as it were. So that's what this project is. And so this talks application that we have here on the left, there you go. Zoom is asking for all sorts of other stuff. Let's see. Hold on, I'm sorry. I'm having to give my password to my computer. There we go. And all right, so hopefully that makes things a little clearer. So sorry for the distraction. So the application, the idea is to make it simpler for people to be able to sign up for Lightning Talks, to register for Lightning Talks. And so this is going to be sort of a streamlined version of that. But I feel like this provides an opportunity to step through the fundamentals of what do you need to do if you're building a Django application. What are the things you need to think about? What are the things you need to be aware of? So some of the intro stuff I have, it looks like it might not be necessary as far as getting things up and running. I'm a little more accustomed to doing a live tutorial, and so you're sort of trying to be out hands-on and help sure people have their systems running. But it looks like most folks are just going to be sort of following along, so that's fine. So we're going to assume that you're all wonderful computer people and you've all done all the appropriate things. You've set up a virtual environment and you've gotten Django installed and gotten Django running, and you see the rocket screen and you're happy. Also, I'm going to assume that you've got Git installed on your machine and you've initiated the Git repository for this directory so that you can keep track of changes in your code, and you've pushed this code repository to your preferred Git repository on GitHub or on Bitbucket or GitLab or wherever you choose. So we're going to move through that sort of initial setup phase. I'm going to pause one last time here just to sort of make sure there's no one who's lost or no one who has like a question or who ran into issues with setup. Anyone by show of hands or waving? Looking, everybody's good. Okay, all right. Let me go back. I seem to have lost the chat window. Let's see.
Excuse me, sir.
I'm sorry?
I did everything you told me. I got Django locally, but I don't know how to run it. Like,
yeah. Okay, how to get
the
it
rocket, yeah.
Okay, let me go back. So, you want to be in your actual directory, where you use it, and you want Python manage.py run server. And if you're doing that in your terminal, it's probably not a bad idea to create a second terminal window. And so if you look on the screen, you'll notice I've got here. So this is where I've just sort of am working on the code in this terminal window. This is where I actually have that process running. So let me see, kill that.
Okay.
And so Python manage.py run server. So if we go back to the web browser, you will see that the site can't be reached because I've just shut that process down. But if I start it again, you notice, the process, it tells me it's running. It's starting your development server, and it should also give you the web address that you can go to. And now the site is back.
Okay, I just get a syntax error, like file manage.py line 16 from ex.
Okay.
One else get this error, or does it work in everyone?
So that is a little hard to debug from the distance.
Yeah, maybe I just copy it again. I clone the Git repository again, and hopefully it works then.
Okay.
So,
and also, let me see. Let me.
Should do it.
All right. All right. So we're gonna move on. And Ricardo, if you can mute your mic, so we're not picking up the background noise. Thank you. All right. So working from the assumption that you've got things going here. We've got your Rocket page, and now before you can start building an app, you need to know what it is you're actually trying to build, or what it is you're trying to get done. Let me find my chat screen because it's not. So in this case, in this application, what we want to do is we want people to be able to. The full version of the application is one where we want people to be able to sign up for Lightning Talks. In this sort of stripped down application, we're going to focus on just being able to keep track of different talks and who is giving them. So this won't be exactly what you would see in the full live application, which is actually something I'm still working on, still sort of fine tuning. But for sort of context and background, the idea is that the focal point of this is people will be giving talks, and then there are just certain things that you want to know about a talk. If someone's going to give a talk, you want to know, okay, well, what are they talking about? What's the title of the talk? Then who is this person? And then for my purposes, I need to be able to contact the person. I need to to know something about them, to be able to contact them, some fundamental information about that person. And so when you first get Django installed, there's a process where you need to create a super user. I'm going to sort of just step over that because again, I think that sort of thing is fairly well covered in a lot of the standard get Django installed information. And we're going to move into talking about the application itself. So let me go here. I've used Git tags, and if you're looking at the GitHub repo, let's see. Show you if you're looking at the GitHub repo, you will notice here these releases. And there are tags here. The tags are I've numbered them, but some of them were placed in later. You can add tags to Git later. But if you're starting from tag 1, and then we're going to go through these in numerical order until final, and if we have time, we'll get to bonus. So final should be the final tag, and then bonus is a little something extra at the end if we have time for it. So tag 1 is just getting Django installed. Tag 2 is where we're actually creating this talks application and creating the model for that. So as I said, in Django, a lot of the core functionality is going to be in your app itself. And so let me check out. Typing is important. And let me do this as well. So you check out 2.0. And so now we move forward to the code that's in place for creating the Talk app. So when you're dealing with a Django application, there are two things that you're really going to be focused on. One of those is going to be sort of the core thing, the primary thing that you want to focus on is your model. And so, and I talked about the distinction between applications and the project. So the project itself won't necessarily have models, but your app itself will. And again, within your app, what are we going to focus on? Let's take a look at our app directory. So the talks directory is our app directory, and let me see if I switch back to the 1.0 branch, you'll notice in the talks directory it's empty. You've got this migrations folder, which we'll talk about, but we've got a migrations folder and there's nothing in it. Those are just sort of remnants because I've gone through this project before. If you were creating it new, this talks directory would be empty. This talks directory wouldn't exist until we get to step 2, where you create this application, and there's going to be Python manage.py start app, and then you give it the name of your app. So app name. So in this case, I used talks. And that's going to create this directory structure for you that we see over here on the left. And let me close some of these things that are not what I need right now. We'll get to that later. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. So that's stuff we're not going to see for a little bit. So what do we have here? So we have the key things we're going to focus on are this models.py and the views.py, but we're initially, and the admin, we're going to focus initially on models. So when we're looking at a model, turn my audio up just a little bit. So we're looking at an application. There's certain information that we want to keep track of. That's the reason you're building an application. And so that's really where you start when you're thinking about building a Django application. You really want to start with, why am I building this? What am I trying to do? What am I trying to work with? What's the data that I want to keep track of? And that data itself goes in the model, and that's really going to be one of your starting points. So in this case, I want to keep track of talks, the different lightning talks. And so I need my model. And the model here is your data setup. I'm sorry, sometimes that's sort of assumed after you've dealt with things for a while, but it's not obvious. The fact that your model is where your data goes. So this models.py file is where you define your data model. It's not the actual database itself, but this is what defines what will be stored in your database and what data tables you will have. In this project, we're only going to have, we're going to create one data model. There will be another one that we'll take a look at, but we're going to create one data model. And again, that's so we can put our focus on what needs to be done and why that's important, that sort of thing. So let me do this. So we know we're going to want a model that focuses on keeping track of the talks that we are creating. When you do the Python manage.py start apps, it creates certain things for you. It creates a tests.py file for you. Please write tests. In this tutorial, I won't be going over any testing, but I believe there is a testing talk in the afternoon slot today, and so that is something that I would strongly encourage you to take a look at. And I believe there is at least one other talk over the course of this conference that covers testing. And at the end of this, I've got a sort of a series of notes, sort of an outline that I've made for this, and I'll be putting that in the GitHub repo. I haven't put it there yet, just in case I needed to make any last minute edits to it as we were going through. But tests are important. So along with your model, your views are very important. So this file that we're looking at here, this views.py file, and again, Django creates these for you. The views file is basically where you are going to be determining how you work with the data that is stored in your model. What do you want to do with the data that's in your model? So if you've heard of an MVC framework, model view controller, Django is what's known as an MTV framework if you want the letters to line up appropriately. So model, template, views. The model is the data model. What is the information that you want to keep track of, that you want to store? The T are templates, which are, to a large extent, HTML pages. That's what actually gets displayed to the user when you click on a URL and you go to a page in your web application. It's the template that makes that appear. And then the V are the views. That's what's actually doing the work with your data. And that's where you determine, okay, what do I want people to see? Not so much visually, but data-wise. What types of data do I want people to see? There's also an admin.py file that we will talk about in just a second. So this apps.py file, you'll notice here, it's importing, there's an import here, but the important thing is creating this app config object, this class talks config, and it's giving it the name talks. Excuse me. One of the things that's important in Django is that you need, as you're adding new apps to your Django project, there's a core settings file that you need to register those apps with in Django. And so this is just basically creating a name for that, so that when you can go to Django and say, okay, here's my new app, it's called Talks. That's the name you can use for it. So let's move forward and see what some of this stuff actually looks like, instead of just talking about it theoretically. So if we go back to our models.py file, which was empty a little while ago. So this is what the model file actually looks like with a model defined. And so here we've got one model, we've got this class, we got this talk model here. And let me go back to our page. So I said we'd be defining one model. We're defining the talk model here. One of the things that you want to do after you've gotten your Django project set up is you will want to create a super user. And when you created the super user, that allows you to then log into the admin of your Django project. And I'm actually going to do that in another tab, just so we can sort of see two of them. So I'm logged into the admin. It would normally ask you for a username and password. I've already sort of got that completed. So this is what the Django admin site looks like now. The Django admin site, or the admin application, is one of the more powerful features of Django. And let me go back one step. And there we go. So I've gone back one step to before we had finished creating the Talks app. So I had created the basic Talks app, but there was nothing. I only had a file structure. There was no actual code there. So this is what we're seeing here. Just those sort of empty files that we saw before in the Talks application. If we go to the Django admin, I've been talking about like making a model, building a model. The assumption is being that we have no model. There's actually one model that's already there. And if we look in this authentication and authorization, if you hover over this, you'll notice it gives you the help text models in the authentication and authorization application. And so this is one application that's built into Django, that comes with Django. Now, over the course of this tutorial, I'm not going to be talking really much about working with users. I'll include some links at the end that point to some excellent material on that. but here, sort of for the sake of time and compactness, I'm going to sort of to pass on that for now. But this is a model that is built in to the Django application for you. And so you notice users, and then you can put the users into groups. We click on users. We see there's one user, which is me, the super user. I created that a little earlier. And you can see some basic information about that user. I can also go back and create other users if I want to. I can add users, I can edit users, and I can sort of do everything because I am the super user at this point. And so, let me go back to here. If we go back to stage 3, where some things have actually been created, we take a look at the model. And so a few things have happened here. First, we've defined this model, and let's take a look at that. So we have, and I've got included in the code, in the repo, these are things that I put in, just comments about some of the different things that you can do, some different relevant documentation for Django. The Django documentation itself on the Django site is very good, and it's very helpful for getting you started or letting you know what the different options are. Of course, there's certain basic options I'll cover, but it's impossible to cover them all. So here in this talk model, we want to again focus on people giving these lightning talks. So what do you need to know about a talk? You need to know who's giving the talk, and so that person's personal name and their family name. What's the title of the talk? So the talk title. I want a contact email because as people submit talks, the way the process works, people would submit talks, and then I would let them know, okay, has your talk been accepted or not, depending on how many talks have been submitted. And then it's nice to have a Twitter handle if the speaker has a Twitter handle and wants to share it, and because that allows us to publicize the talk, to share the talk, or let people know that the talk is available. So how do these things get defined? I'm creating this, and if there's anyone who's sort of feeling lost with some of the object-oriented stuff, let me know, and I'll try to slow down and go into it in a little more detail. But the classes are basically your data model is defined like you would a class in Python, and so while it looks like a class, it looks like object-oriented programming. It's not so much an object thing. It's really more just a way to define the fields you would have in a database table. And so as an aside, as a related aside, this is one of the things that makes learning web development a little more complicated than, say, learning to program in Python. The fact that when you're learning web development, there's the Python you need to learn, but then there's also the HTML and related CSS type things that you need to learn. And most modern web application frameworks are database backed, and so there's a certain amount of database knowledge that you need to have. And so these are all things that sort of compound on each other. So here with our class, this talk class, Django gives you a models class that you can inherit from, so for making your data models. And so this is the model talk. We've got this first field, and so each of these attributes is going to be a field in our database table, or a field in one row of our database table. So this personal name is going to be what's called a char field, a character field. A maximum length of 32 characters. And then this help text is optional, but the help text is nice to have depending on the situation. Maybe you want people to know things. As I was building this, I was thinking in terms of sort of having an international audience showing up. And in some countries, here in the US, we use the terms first name and last name, but then in other countries, so I lived in China for a few years, in China and some of the East Asian countries, your family name is literally said first, and then your personal name is said last. So I've used personal name and family name for these name fields, and then I've included help text, with a little bit of a descriptor around them. So you can see here, you can set these different attributes. So a maximum length, so maximum number of characters, and the help text itself. The talk title, it's the same thing. I've got a character field, a max length of 64, so 64 characters. So these character fields are going to be relatively short text fields, and you can set how long you want them to be. The contact email is where we diverge a little bit. And so there's a specific type called the email field that Django provides for you. And you're getting all these because we've done this thing here on line 1 where we've imported from Django.db import models. And if you are working with Django or learning about Django, you might hear people talk about the ORM, the Object Relational Manager. And that's something that makes it much easier for people to work with databases and handle data without having to write a whole bunch of SQL. And so import on line 1 gives us imports the models module, and that's what gives us access to all these different classes. And actually, let's just take a look at that. I'm going to sort of try to not bore you or overwhelm you with all the Django documentation because there's quite a lot of it, but it's also quite good. So one of the first things you're going to think about when you're building your Django application is your model. Again, what's the information I'm trying to keep track of? What's the data I'm actually trying to work with here? And as you do that, you're going to want to know, okay, well, what are the different data types I can work with? What are the different things I can do? What are the different options I have? And so here, this link is to the different field types that are available to you. And so you've got an auto field, this big auto field, integer fields, binary fields. So char field is the one that we're using the most here. String field for small to large strings. But then you've got specific types. So date fields, date time fields, duration fields, email field is the other one that we're using. So you can take a look at this documentation and just sort of, as you start to think about, okay, what kind of information am I trying to keep track of? You can, in a worst case scenario, just start with char fields and just capture it all as text. But as you get into different things, you can look through the different data types that Django makes available to you and then decide, oh, well, this is going to be, I really need a file field. I really need an email field. So you notice here, this email field, it's a char field, which is a character field, just like the other ones that we use, but it checks that the value is a valid email address using email validator. So you can click on that and find out more about what's happening with the email validator. But again, it's something that gives you extra functionality so that if you're wanting to keep track of an email address, you're not having to worry about it being a valid address or an invalid address. So this is our model again. We've got the speaker's name, the talk title, the contact email. This last field, the Twitter handle, it's similar to the others. It's a character field, max length 32 characters. Here, each of the field types in Django has a number of different attributes. I'm only using a few, like max length and sometimes help text, but there's an option for blank to be true and for null to be true. And if you leave these alone, the default false, if you set them both to true, this is what allows you to make a field optional. So if I've got someone who's giving a talk, I need to know their name. I need to know the title of the talk. I need to know their contact email so I can reach out to them. They don't have to have a Twitter handle. It's nice if they have one so that we can publicize the talks, but maybe they have a Twitter handle and they don't want to give it out. So it's an optional thing. And so by setting these values, these attributes blank and null, to setting them both to true, that makes the field optional. And so we've done that. Let's see. We also have to, I don't want tests. So we've got this data field. We've got our data model designed. But before you can actually, and so you would think if you go here to our Django admin, you'll notice that the talk field is now available. And so models in the talk application, and you can see here talks. So I can click on that. You see here on the right, recent actions. And so these are just talks that I put in. So if I click on this, this will show me the list of talks. And so here are the talks that I've just added in some talks manually. If we go back here, you can see here, click add. I can add a new talk. I will say J1 MVP. So you may or may not recognize here my background. This is a screen from Overwatch. I play the game Overwatch. This person, J1, is the current Overwatch League MVP. I'm going to give him an email address. His game tag is Sinatra. He has no Twitter handle. Well, he has a Twitter handle, but we're going to leave it optional. So you can see there are talks there. If we go back to the home, you can also, so you can add a talk from here, or if you go to the actual list of talks, you can add a talk here. You've got a few different options. So I mentioned earlier about having to register your application with Django. For this talks model to show up here in the admin, a few extra things have to happen. You can't just create a talks model and then have it show up. So one, you create a talks model, and then in this apps.py, this file is sort of created and filled in for you when you do the start app command in Django. But the admin.py that was empty earlier has to be filled in. So if we, let's see, if we take a look. So if we go back to step 2, the checkout when we just created the app, this admin.py starts empty. But once we've created our talk model, and if we want that talk model to be available to us in the admin, we need to register it here. And so we've added this line, this from .models, we're importing talk. And if you'll notice, the admin.py file and the models file are in the same directory. They're both in the talk directory. I'm going to close migrations here. And so, from this directory, from the models module in this directory, import talk. And so we're importing that talk class. And then we're creating this new talk admin class. And so this is a model admin class. And again, I've got, if you look through the code directory, I've tried to place links to the relevant documentation alongside the code. And so this model admin class is a representation of the model that will be shown in the admin. And so that's why when we go to the admin, when we actually see a talk, we see those fields: the personal name, family name, talk title, and the contact email. And notice, and you'll also see that the help text that I've included is there as well. And again, when we add if you go to add a new talk, that help text is there as well. So here with the model admin, adding it to admin.py, this makes that model available in admin.py. This is useful because there are times where you, as the super user of the site, may want to interact with something in the model more directly instead of having to write code to do that, or instead of having to go through a web form. So the admin lets you use this directly. There are a couple of different things here. Let's see. That's not what I want. I'll make a slight code change here. If I comment out this class and then change this, get rid of that talk admin. So this admin, I'm pointing, sorry. Here on line 21, there's admin.site.register. From line one you're importing from Django.contrib import admin. And so the admin.site.register, this by itself, just doing admin on line 21, just line 21 by itself, all you really need is line 3 and line 21. Well, line 1, line 3, and line 21. You need to import this admin module, and then on line 3, you're telling Django what model you're wanting. And so you're importing the talk model. And then admin.site register the talk model. That's all you need to do a basic registration. But you'll notice that the display is different. And so it's just saying, showing you talk object 1, talk object 2. And so it just doesn't display as well or as nicely. So let's see, go here. It just gives you this sort of bland talk. It's like, yes, I did make a talk object. I have made 4. Here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, here's 4, but you don't have any useful information about them. And so what's a little more preferred is, one, creating a talk admin, because again, this model admin type, the model admin class, is a representation of the model and the admin. And then when you do that, you can do a couple of things. You can tell it, you can set this list display attribute that the model admin object has. And so what you'll see in Django often, one of the more commonly used conventions for naming things is to use sort of like the specific name and then the object type. And so here I've got this model admin class. I'm subclassing model admin. And so, and I'm subclassing model admin with my talk model. And so this new object, this new class is called talk admin. Just like when we looked at the models class, my linter is always angry at me. My model is just called talk. And so here, when I create this model admin, I call that class talk admin, because this is where I'm doing the admin for the talk class. And this is a convention that you'll see. I don't know that I go so far as to say it's like industry best practice, but it's something that you see fairly commonly as you're moving through Django projects. And depending on what kind of coding you've done and what sorts of projects you've worked on, you understand the importance of having good naming conventions so that people, your coworkers can understand what you've done and what you're trying to do. And so you'll notice there are 2 things here, these 2 attributes, one list display, and then search fields. So this list display attribute is what gives us the nicer looking, let me refresh that. It gives us the nicer looking things, but also gives us choice. And so I have chosen to go with talk title. Here's list display. I mean, I could do family name. That would not be super helpful, but it is a thing you could do. And so now when you list the talks, you just list the family name of the person giving the talk. That's not super helpful, but I point that out to say that it is a choice that you can make. So depending on what you want or what you need, you could do a number of different things. Now, okay, as I tell my coworkers, I'm now in the typing and seeing what happens things phase of demonstrating. So let's just say you want family name and talk title. And so it will show those different attributes. So you can pick and choose what actually gets displayed here in the admin, depending on your needs, on your interests, or your purposes. For our purposes here, it's a fairly simple thing. I'll have to go back through all my type. Oh, that's not what I want. Let's see. There we go. So we got these attributes, list display. So, and I'm pointing these out because these are some of the more useful, some of the more immediately useful attributes. List display, but then also search fields. And so search fields is not necessary, but you'll notice here in the top left, I'm sorry, there's a search box. And so if I wanted to search, I can search by different things, and what I can search by is what's going to be defined here in the search field. So search fields, I've got personal name, family name, and again, these are all going to be based on what's in the model. And so I can't have anything in my search fields that's not in the model. The search fields have to be literally fields that you defined in your model. And so I've got this set so I can search on personal name, family name, talk title, email, or Twitter handle. So I can search on anything. So I have made these models, and I've made them based on different people that I know. Let's do this. it occurs to me. So I sometimes forget I've made these models. I've made these talks. You all haven't, and they're full of my own little sort of goofy jokes. So you all don't know what's in them. So let's just do this. I'm going to display all the information so that it can all be seen, so that you all can see what I've got here. Let's see. Maybe not all the information because no one cares about the email because the emails are all made up. So now the list display is going to show the talk title and also the first and last name and the Twitter handle of the speaker. So if we take a look at that, did something wrong. What did I do? Oh, there we go. Okay. Had to give Django a chance to catch up. And actually, let me do one more thing. There we go. Okay. So here are the talks that I made. Talk title. Here are the people's names. J1, Jeff Kaplan. Jeff Kaplan is the game director for Overwatch. Jeff Triplett is one of my coworkers at RevSys and has been the conference chair for DjangoCon a few years and is the president of DEFNA. So that's his talk is DEFNA. We're your friends because we are. And then this talk by me, play more Overwatch because I'm encouraging you to play more Overwatch. So why do I go through all that? To sort of show you, here's some of the different fields that you have that are available now in search. And so if we look at our search code, I can search by personal name, family name, the title, the contact email, or the Twitter handle. And so let's say I search for Jeff. It's going to show me, I've got 2 speakers named Jeff. If I search by, let's say I search for Juan. So that's Sinatra's his family name is Juan, so it will return that. So this is going to search, I've got this set now, so it will search by almost everything. If you only wanted to search by one field, then you just do that here. So if I only wanted to search by, I said I didn't want to search by, there we go. So let's say I only want to be able to search by personal name or Twitter handle. That's arbitrary. Here we go. I need to put my license. I've got this relatively new computer and I still haven't put in my my Sublime license. And so now let's see, what did I do? So now I can only search by personal name or by Twitter handle. And so if I search by Juan, by Sinatra's last name, nothing happens because I'm not searching by those fields anymore. But if I search by, the Jeff search still works because I'm still searching by personal name or J, Sinatra, or by my name. It's important to spell your own name right. That's an important thing. It's a programmer insider tip. Spell your own name correctly. But if I search for a John, we don't have a John, and so there you go. And so these are some basic things you can do with the admin. But this is, as I said, when you create a new project, you're going to see this. Why is that angry? Title. As you create a new project, you're almost definitely going to want to be able to work with it in your admin. And so that's what this file is for. So we've got our model. We've used this apps thing. We've got actually that was what I need to show you. So I've talked about this before. This idea of needing to register the app with Django. And so let's take a look at our settings file. That happens in our settings file. So again, we named the file config so that most of our core files would be in this config directory. And one of the most important files in our config directory is going to be settings.py. So we're going to look at 2 files here, settings.py and actually the URLs file. I've got a little bit of morning voice here that I'm sort of trying to get sorted out. I apologize for that. So we've got two files here, the settings file and the URLs file, both of which are important. Let me get this out of my way. Oh, hold on, what is happening here? There we go. Oh, hold on, let's see. That's why I couldn't find the chat before. Why can't I make the chat bigger? All right, let me take a quick pause here and look at the chat and see what is going on. Sorry, you all, I wasn't looking at the chat before. When I went into the screen share, it was hidden. Welcome below, loud and clear. Major differences in Django 2 and recently Django 3. Let's see. I think major difference between Django 2 and 3 is Django 3's support for asynchronous programming, although there's not a huge amount being done with that right now. But I know off the top of my head, that's one of the big differences. Also, and sadly, I can't recall whether this happened in Django 2 or Django 3. It feels like there was a shorter period of time between Django 2 and Django 3, but URL patterns here on lines 19 and 20. In Django, I know in Django like 1, you basically had to use regular expressions for this path. I can't remember if it was Django 2 or Django 3 where that went away. Well, it didn't go away. It wasn't required. So you don't have to know regex to make your Django URLs. And I'm going to talk about those in just a second. All right, so Usman has not finished his setup. Can I open normal app as well? Like you're adding an admin side. I want to see you on the user side. Okay. So Uday, your question as far as seeing what we're going to see on the user side, we're not actually, and you might have come in after I mentioned this, but we're not actually going to be focusing on users at this point. So what we're going to see for the most part is, well, we haven't gotten to sort of what the users are going to see yet. What we're going to see here is the adding and editing of talks will be done by the admin, but the viewing of talks will be done by the user. But that we haven't gotten to yet. So we're going to get to that in just a little bit. And we'll sort of step through why that's not a thing that just sort of shows up by default. Does the admin search have an implied wildcard at the end? I don't think so. It's from my understanding, it tends to be fairly, yeah, I don't. So is it an applied wildcard, or I guess, or is it a perfect match? That I'm honestly not sure of. I would have to look at the docs for that. I'm honestly not sure. Let's see. Oh, yes, you can. Thanks before and after. See, but so you all don't even need me in the chat. You all are entering your own questions in the chat. To what extent can you modify the UI of the Django admin? Soham, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correct. To a large extent. So one of the nice things about Django is it lets you do a lot of sort of fundamental things relatively easily, but as you dig deeper in, it is nearly infinitely customizable because it is basically, it's just Python. Python and some HTML and a little bit of JavaScript. So you can do all sorts of things here. I won't be going into that very much, but again, you can the Django docs will be great for that. Okay, Hung is asking how to set up credentials to log into the admin site. So for that you have to create a super user. Let's see. And maybe I didn't cover that. I thought I did. Yeah, you know what? I did not. That is my fault. And so one thing that you realize is a lot of being a software developer is just sort of looking up stuff that you use occasionally and then forget, or
I pasted the command into the chat.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And so there's Python manage.py and then a number of commands. a bit of confusion is there's also like a Django-admin command that you can use that will run a lot of the same things. But so that command is in the chat. Other use cases for multiple apps in one project. Mentioned Django tutorial, how to create. Okay, so we got that. Use cases for multiple apps in one project. So we're actually sort of seeing that here. So the the use cases can vary, sort of depending on what it is you're trying to do. And I won't get into a whole lot of complication here, but even in this app, this relatively simple app, and this will circle back to one of the things. Hung, you also will need to run migrations before when you create your super user. There we go. Tom's got it. So one of the questions is like, what is the use case for multiple apps in one project? And I was going to talk about registering apps, but let me sort of circle back to this. So in this project, we have this one app, Talks, and we have within Talks, we have this one model called Talk, and that seems fairly simple. But the reality is, if we look at the actual application itself, here from the admin, we actually have two applications. The authentication and authorization application and the Talks application. It just so happens that the auth application is built in. And so one of the reasons, one of the reasons or motivations for having, let me sure I'm answering the question properly. The case for having multiple apps in one project is, one, you might want to separate out some of your functionality for various reasons. Maybe in sort of an object-oriented way, if you want to have one set of functionality that gets changed or updated more frequently, you don't want to have to work with the entire code base. And so there are separation reasons there. Or maybe you've got different people working on different bits and pieces of functionality, so you want some separation there. But then another sort of more commonly cited reason for having multiple apps in the same, well, for having multiple apps in the same project, it's generally a matter of you've got different functionality in the different apps. And then that brings us to this idea of what's known as the reusable app. And so if we take an example, if we take a look at this authentication and authorization app, that's a little different, but because it's built in, but it's something that's used between every Django project. So this app is built in. There are other applications, other Django applications that you can use. So if you wanted, say, CMS functionality, or there's like GeoDjango or other things, if you want other, like if you want specific functionality for working with geological information, there's like a GeoDjango app, and then you can add that app into your project and bring that functionality from another project into your project, or bring that functionality from that app into your project. So that's sort of the core underlying motivation for having multiple apps in one project, because there's sort of the other approach would be to just have it all in one thing, you know, to just have all your code sort of run together. Let's see. Can we make multiple apps based on the number of models and relation between them? Multiple apps based on the number of models. Well, so let's see. And this now, and this is sort of going slightly beyond the scope of what I'm planning to talk about here, but this is sort of like a larger architectural question. What you really want to think about, and I'm looking at Soam's question in the chat, what you really need to do is sort of think about how you want your project to be structured. And so you could have multiple apps, each with one model, or you could have one app with multiple models. And it really depends on how that data needs to connect to each other, how the data needs to interact with each other. And so as an example, let's see, let me go back to this. When we talk about in the settings file, registering applications, so the settings file in Django is huge, and it may seem intimidating up front. Try not to be too intimidated. There's some of the built-in sections you're gonna have here. You're gonna have this installed apps section. So this settings file was created when you did when you did the Python manage.py start project. It creates this for you, and most of this is filled in for you. So there's installed apps, and then middleware on line 45, installed apps on line 33, middleware on line 35, line 45. What was not there when I created the project was lines 42 and lines 43. And so this is kind of something we do. If you notice, installed apps, it's just a list of strings. Just in Python terms, it's a settings file. But each of these variables, each of these not environment variables, but each of these variables, each of these settings is just well, not actually not all of them are a list of strings, but this one in particular, installed apps, is just a list of strings. You can see on line 45. One thing, it's sort of a common industry practice, is to create the second installed apps value, because these lines 33 through 40, Django does that for you by default. And so you'll notice the first one is the admin, and then the next one is the auth. And so that admin application that we get out of the box without really doing anything, that's the admin application. And then this authorization on authentication, that's the other application. So those are Django apps, reusable apps, but they're just included with Django. So there are a couple ways. Here on line 43, we have registered our app, the Talks app, with Django. So Django knows that the Talks app is a thing that exists and that it should be looking for. We could have just added that here to the end of this list, like on, I could have just made it, push down line 40. I could have added it there. It's sort of it's considered one of the better practices. It just makes things simpler if you have this sort of our apps thing, because what that does is it tells you, okay, here are the apps, the default Django apps that are installed by default. And then you can have this separate thing with the plus equals operator that would just append our apps that we've added to that construct. And so that installed apps variable has them. One moment. And so I point these things out to say that, one, and again, sort of the discussion of how many apps and how many models and how many models per app and that sort of thing. That's one of those things that you will sort of have to decide as you go along, and that's something that comes with experience and with the problem that you're working on. So all those things are going to be variable based on what you're doing. So here in the settings file, again, we've got this installed app, and we've added our app, the Talks app, to this installed app. And so Django won't pick up your app until that's done. And then also the admin.py, again, the talk model that we created, it won't be visible in the admin until it's actually been registered here with this talks model. And let me take a pause here, and let's see what time is it. It's 9, it's a little more than an hour. We pause to look at some questions, and also, so we're all here on Zoom. I am going to maybe go for a little while longer and see if folks want to break. But well, I guess one of the nice things about being on a Zoom conference is if someone needs like a break or a bio break or what have you, you can sort of turn on or off your camera and move around on your own. So I won't worry about managing that as much. But let's see. We look in the chat here and see if there are any other questions. Okay, how would you build a project that has a model accessed both through an API and through a web application? Okay, is this the case for 3 apps? Not necessarily. Let's see. So Tom's question is, how would you build a project that has a model access both through an API and through a web application? So you can do that. Let's see. So and that's beyond the scope of this tutorial. But the short answer there is you would use well, there are a lot of things you could do. The most logical thing to do would be to use what's called the Django REST framework, and that is what will allow you to set up API endpoints so that an outside application can attach to your Django app. You may or may not need 3 different apps, depending on it's as with many things in program, the answer is it depends on what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it and what your needs are. But you could very well have, if you've got a model that you wanted to be accessed through both an API and through a standard web application, you could have that one app accessible both ways, or you could separate them out. It's sort of, depending on what it is you're trying to do and what your needs are, what you're trying to get done, way beyond the scope of this tutorial. But there are multiple options there depending on what you're trying to do. The role of password validator in settings.py. Let's see. So now, where did I? Oh, you know what? I didn't do that because that's. I thought where did I do that? I don't have a link here. So for specific things in settings.py, I'm going to refer you to the docs because those are going to give you a lot more information than I can. Because again, like settings.py is, there's certain fundamental things. Let's see. So we've got password validators. Another thing to keep in mind about settings.py, so there are certain things that are built in. Again, I think at this point, everything that's in settings.py is what Django puts in it by default, with the exception of lines 42 and 43 that I've added. The rest are the Django defaults. And so, so here, this all password validators, it is this is a list of dictionaries of different things that you can use to validate passwords. You've got language codes, time zone information, all sorts of other stuff. And then you can add other settings to settings.py going forward if you need. And let me take a look here, password. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Hung reminded that. Yeah, and so it will yell at you that password authenticator. If you try to give it a password that's too simple, it will be angry at you. During what scenarios should you modify it? You should modify it if you know why you need to modify it. And again, I would direct you to the documentation there because there are a number of there are a lot of options and a lot of choices. The architectural pattern Django follows, it is what's known as an MTV architecture, similar to MVC. If you're familiar with MVC, Model View Controller, Django uses MTV, Model Template View. We have looked at models. We have not yet looked at templates or views, but we are going to get to those here in just a little bit. Let's see. Oh, realizing when my other computer screen keeps going up, it's because it's not plugged in. So here we are. So we came to the settings file to point out the fact that when you make a new application in Django, again, I've talked about the importance of the model. The model is very important, but creating a model by itself doesn't get you anything. There are other things you have to do. You have to make sure your app is registered. Again, this apps.py. When you do the start app command, your Python manage.py start app, name of your app, it creates this for you. And so that gives you this convenient name that you can then use in your settings.py file. Nope. So that gives you this convenient name you can then use here on line 40. So notice on line 43 here, the installed app's name, it's the same as the name that's here on line 5. So Django creates that for you. So you create your model in admin.py, you register your model with the admin. So you register your model with the admin if you want to work with the model through the admin. And then in settings, you also have to register your application with Django. And all of that gets you here. And so what we have now is we have a situation where you as the administrator can create talks and you can see the talks. But what you really want is a situation where people can see, okay, what talks are there? So this, again, this is a streamlined application sort of for demonstration, for educational purposes. So here, we're not actually going to be getting into the creating of talks by outside parties. What we're going to focus on instead is how do you let other people who would be coming to use the web application see what talks are available and get more information about those. And so for that, I'm going to close settings because we're not using it now. I'm going to close apps, so we're not using that. Closing the admin. We have the model. And so for that, we get into the view of MTV. So again, Django's a MTV framework model template view. So the model is how your data is structured. The view is how that data is worked with. And so one of the first things you want, and let's see, I've got 2 tabs here because, so here we have the admin for the site. And so here I can see all the details. If someone were to just go to this site, if it were called like Kojo's Lightning Talks or DjangoCon Lightning Talks, this is what they would see now. They would just see this rocket ship. Let's see. The recent actions on the admin page. I just still the place talk. I haven't sort of bothered to fiddle with that to make that look nicer. That's the honest answer. For our purposes, it wasn't super important. And if you're the admin of the site, you may or may not feel that that's important. So I just didn't dig into that. Is sort of the short answer there. So I don't understand what are Django manager and models. Oh, okay. Let's see. Let's see. So let me come back to that in a second, because we'll see a little bit more of that as we get into views. Or that the context for answering that will make more sense as we get into the actual views. So again, this is what our website would look like to the internet at this point. Just like, oh, it's a Django site. That's nice, but it's not really telling anyone anything. We as the admin can see more detail on the back end. So if we want the rest of the world to see things, we need to go to the views, and let me, hold on, rearrange some things. And oh, and let me also point out, so we created our model. We talked a lot about our model. When you create a model or when you change fields on a model, Django has this concept of migrations, and that's very important. So who was it? Someone was trying to create super user earlier, and they ran into an error that told me that they had not run migrations. Yeah. So Hung was trying to create the super user, and he ran into an error that said it needed an auth user table. So creating a model lays out a definition of what your database should look like, what your data table should look like, but it doesn't actually create the actual database tables itself. Migrations Migrations does that. So Django has 2 commands. One called make migrations, and the other called migrate. And so if we take a look here in the talks directory, we have this migrations here. And so there are 2 things. When you first start a Django project, you do start project, and then you spin up Django. You will often see, let's see, and I think, who was it? Hung? I think who was it that had the error? Hung. So I think when you first started your Django project before you created the super user, you probably saw something that said like you had like 17 unmigrated migrations to do or something like that. When you first started a Django project, there are a number of there are models that are defined but they haven't been migrated. So this migrations process is how you go from having a data structure defined, like in your models.py, to actually turning that into real database tables. And so the make migrations will create a file like this. And so you notice there's this migrations folder here on the left, not on the left, here in my side panel. And then inside that, I have this one file, initial.py, and this is my initial migrations file. And if you look at it, and again, this is a relatively simple project. We're only doing one migration. You'll notice this looks a lot like my models.py. And that's because it's taking what I defined here in models.py, and it is creating this migration. So this is telling Django, okay, actually create this model, migration.create model, actually make this database table. And the table is going to be called talk. So the name of the table is talk. The fields the table will have are these. And so notice there's personal name, online 18, 19 family name, talk title, contact email. Someone's mic kicked in. And so you'll notice all these fields are here. Someone's microphone is on. We're getting background noise. I'm not sure who that is. Oh, whoever that is out there. It looks like it might be Tom, but no, I don't know. Okay, okay, there we go, Zude. All right. So you'll notice here in the migrations, it's got all the same field names, except for one, this ID. And so this is one that I didn't have in my models.py. Notice here, and I don't have an ID field in my models.py. This ID, and this is something I alluded to earlier with the complications, some of the complications of learning web development. It is needing to learn a number of different fields, not just HTML and CSS, but also Python, but also some database information. In any database, you're going to have, in database terms, what's known as a primary key, which is some way to identify a specific record in a database. If you are not super familiar with databases, a database table looks like a spreadsheet visually, and then each row in that spreadsheet is going to be one record. And so, for instance, for each of our talks, you have one row in the spreadsheet, and actually, it looks like this, or more realistically, it looks like, no, that's not what I want. That is what I want. It looks like this. So, oh, I forget it takes a second for that to catch up. There we go. It looks like this. So your database, if you were to look physically at your database table, it looks like this. And so it has all these fields that we know, sort of like a spreadsheet, but there's also a field that you don't always see that is, let me undo that. That'd be all right. Either way. There's a field that you don't see called an ID or a primary key. And that's how you identify. So when we look at, if we go back, and we see like the recent changes of talk object 4, talk object 2, the IDs for these individual talks are number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. They're simple IDs in this case because it's a simple project, but that's what these IDs are. And so here, what we're seeing here, this is the migration that is telling Django, okay, create this database again, create a table, name it talk, give it these fields. And so each time you make a change to one of the fields in your database, like if I were to rename this database, rename one of these fields, I would have to, if before that change actually took effect, I would need to do a make migration, make migrations, that, you know, Python manage.py, make migrations, and that would create a new migrations file. So now I have this 001 initial migrations file. It would create a new migrations file that would show me what changed, what are the differences between the prior database state and this new database state that's being proposed. And then I would run the migrate command, and that would actually make those changes happen. That would actually apply those changes to the database. And that is a thing, Django. And I know I have a link somewhere. Here we go. Well, and I know I think I have a link further on in the code. So if you check out the master branch from the repository, all the sort of the completed version of the code is there. I'm stepping through these different tags to sort of show you the different steps that you see as you go along. But yes, so migrations is a very important thing. And again, it's important to keep in mind that every time you make a change to your database, to your model, and specifically a change to your model fields, you need to run a migration. We'll see a little bit later that I will make a change to this model, but it's not a change to a model field, and so a migration isn't required there. So, all right, let's go back to the code here. I made that a little longer just to make it easier to read. But so this is your migration. Admin, we'll close that. All right, and so now we're getting to this view. And so, as I pointed out, what we have is, close that. What we have is the world will see this if they come to the site, but we as the admin can see this. We want the world to see something that's a little more useful to them. We want the world to see, okay, well, what talks, you know, what are these talks that we have? Like, I can see them, but the rest of the world can't. And for that, we're going to create a view. And again, back to the question about the Django architecture, this model template view architecture. Nope, that's models. There we go. There's our view. So there are two things here. There is the view itself, but then there is this discussion, this deeper underlying discussion about how Django works. Django at its core uses what's called a request response architecture, and I believe there's a section in the docs on that, and that is worth reading just from the standpoint of having a sort of a general understanding of like, okay, what's going on here? HTTP. Let's see, that should give me. Where is it? There's a topic here on request response. Is that what I want? No, that's the API reference. So the Django, so here, like this request response objects API reference, this is going to show you like the different the different details as far as things you can do with HTTP requests and responses. But that's sort of the core of Django. Let's see. Oh, that's not what I want. There's a really, there we go. Requests and responses. That's what is that what I want? That may not be what I want. But so the basic idea, and again, if you are or are not familiar with HTTP requests and responses, the way the web works in general, the way a web application works is you have HTTP, we've all seen it, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. You go to a website just like I've done here. I've gone to this website. Let's say I go to djangoproject.com. Go to the documentation. So I've gone to docs.djangoproject.com and I'm going to search the documentation. So if I search for, let's see, URLs. Actually, let me grab this. There we go. Search for Django.urls. And so if I do this search, if I type it correctly, this is me sending an HTTP request. And so when I hit enter, oh, really? That's interesting. So when I hit request, well, actually, let's go back to that one. That one's wrong. When I hit this, I'm sending an HTTP request. It's being sent to the Django servers. Django is getting that, and it's processing it, and it's just doing a search and saying, oh, I didn't find anything for what you searched for, Kojo. But this is how Django works. So it takes this request, processes it in some way, and then sends a response back to the application that requested it. In most cases, a web browser. We're dealing with web applications. All right, I'm going to find that later because it's bothering me now. But there's a really nice article about HTTP requests and responses. I just can't find it at the moment. All right, I'll stop letting that bother me. But to talk about HTTP requests and responses, that is important here because we're looking at what people see when they come to the site, what we want them to be able to do on the site, and that starts with a view. So when I sent that HTTP request to a site, to a Django site, a couple things happen. There's this urls.py, and that does the routing. It tells the request where to go, but what gets done with the request, the actual work, happens in a view. And so that's where, again, we talk about Django being an MTV framework, model template view. The work of handling those requests actually happens in the views. And so, and in a lot of cases, more specifically in the render function. So let me, and I see a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to pause on those for a second and let me just sort of finish this section on views because this is fairly critical. Because this is kind of where the actual meat of Django happens. So a request comes into your site, it gets routed to a particular view based on your routing, and we'll see that in the urls.py in just a second. But that request comes in, and so here in this views file, we're importing this render function from Django shortcuts, and then we're importing this talk model because we want to be able to work with the talk model that we built. And so what is this view that we have here? So the first thing that we want to be able to show people is if people come to our site about lightning talks, we want them to be able to see what lightning talks there are, yeah? I mean, that hopefully that is fairly straightforward. If you've got a site that says, hey, well, we have a bunch of talks, we're giving lightning talks. Well, what are they, Kojo? Like, I would like to know what talks there are, and do I want to go to them? And so this first view we're creating is what's called a list view. Now, this can be a little confusing. I've always sort of been had mixed feelings about the terminology here, because when you say we're creating this list view, it sounds very much like you're creating like a template or something that's going to be like the visual display part. It's called a view, but this is not the visual display part per se. This is more the view that you want to give people into your database. So what data do you want to show? What data do you want to be viewed? And that's really what the view does. It works with your data. And so that's why you've got this here on line 4, you're importing from models, you're importing your talk model. And then I've got this method called list view. And as the document says, it creates a list of all the talks. This line 9, this is a link to the documentation on retrieving all objects. And so there are a lot of different queries that you can do. Django, the Django ORM provides you with a lot of different ways to make queries. And so, and then this comes back to the question that that Soham had about managers in models. And so once you've created a model, so again, this talk class that we have, that we define in models, it has this idea of what's called a manager. And so here I'm building this construct that I call a talk list. And that talk list is talk.objects.all. And so this .objects is, where is my, let me do that. Again, there's a full document here on getting objects. There's this idea that every model object has something called a manager, and that manager oversees how you pull information out of the database table that it's related to. So for instance, here we have this from talk, we have this talk object, and I want all the objects out of it. And so I want every talk that is there. I don't want just some or a particular, I don't want a specific one. I don't want a subset of the talks. I want all of the talks. And so there, the code is fairly straightforward. So here they've got this entry object that they made, .objects.all. So this is the question that Soham is asking about managers. So the manager is the main source of query sets for a model. And so, and again here, managers, they're accessible only via model classes rather than model instances. So you have this separation between a model class and a model instance. So if we take a look at models, so this talk here on line 8, we have this talk model, and it's again sort of similar to a database table. And the best sort of visual representation of that is this. So this is sort of what the talk model would look like. And let me keep messing with this. Personal name. I don't want an F string. There we go, family name. All right, let that catch up. And so this is what the database itself looks like, the database table or the database model. Each of those rows is a model instance. And this is sort of like the simple visual representation of it. And hold on. And so, let me get rid of that. And so when you're working with your data models, sometimes you want everything that's in a model, sometimes you want specific instances from that model, sometimes you want a certain subset, which is what's known as a query set. And let me see, what do we have here? Recent additions. It looks like someone had a comment for me. Use in different types of Django exception classes. I'm going to touch on one of those briefly later on, but for the most part, I'm going to have to refer you to the documentation on that because there are just a huge number. Let's see, Uday. You have a naming convention here, like model name, single the name, table. Oh, okay. Being from a data science background, pandas and NumPy. Okay. Soham, the answer to your question about pandas and NumPy is you could, but it's sort of the trouble that you would go through to do that is going to vary. Yeah, it's one of those things where you're probably going to be better off using the Django ORM for certain basic stuff, and then doing your actual processing, pulling things out of the ORM for certain basic things, and then doing your more detailed processing in pandas or in NumPy. But you probably don't really want to try to talk to the Django database with pandas or NumPy. Again, you can, but there are they're different. The trouble involved there might be more hassle than it's worth. So this question, a naming convention. So the naming convention, like model name singular and table name plural, that is more sort of a sort of a personal approach or a sort of organization by organization approach. So for instance here, I mean, I'm just calling it talk. It could be called talks, and then each individual talk could be called a talk. Each model instance could be called a talk. But that's not, I don't know that there's in that case, there's not really much of a sort of a specific like industry-wide type of thing. But this idea of managers, the managers are what are used to interact with the data models themselves. And so, let's see, what was I looking for? There we go. So here again, retrieving objects, the simplest way to retrieve objects from a table is to get all of them. To do this, use the all method on a manager. And so by default, all of your data models are going to have a manager that's called object. And so, no, that's not what I want. So what models I want? Let me close admin. Here are my views. So here, once I've got this model created, the talk model, it has this manager that is by default named object, and that manager, for lack of a better term, manages your it's the object relational manager. It manages your relationship with the data model. You can create custom managers. There's a huge amount of detail you can go into there. Here we'll just be focusing on sort of the basics. And so with this manager, the manager itself has a number of different methods that are available. The one that we're using here is all. And so this is just saying, okay, manager, give me all of the instances from this data model. And that's what's happening here. So this talk list construct that I'm building is just grabbing all of the model instances from the talk model. Yeah, that makes sense. And so one of the reasons I'm focusing on this is because this is sort of one of the core things that you will see in Django when I talk about that request response pattern. So, and if we look at this view function, creating this list view, and it's taking as a parameter, it's taking a request. And so some sort of HTTP request is coming in, and it's taking that request and it's going to do some processing on it. So what's it going to do? Well, first it's going to, once this view is activated, it's going to build this talk list thing, which is going to just grab all of the talk objects from talk table. And then it's going to build what's called a context. And this actually makes a little more sense sort of from the bottom. It's going to build this context, and this context is a dictionary. The key for the dictionary is talk list, which is just the same as the field. And the value for that context construct is going to be this talk list variable that I just built, which is all of our talks. And then here at the end, you have this render. This render function, and again, this is really sort of like the basic fundamentals of Django in most web frameworks. This render function that we've imported from this Django shortcuts, it's going to take that request and it's going to craft an HTTP response from the information we give it. So we go back to this idea of a request response cycle. A request comes in, and it's literally called request up here. A request comes in, and I'll direct you to the documentation, and you can find in the doc something that will sort of step you through that process. But a request comes in, it says, okay, well, where's the request coming from? What's being requested? What's in the request? That request gets routed to a particular view. In this case, it's this list view. That view takes that request, and it's going to render it. It's going to render it through a template. I don't want the whole thing. And this string here is a template, and you'll notice it's in talk/talklist.html. It's an HTML file, and it's going to render that. It's going to render the context of data into that template. So what does that mean? what it means is an HTTP request comes into Django. Django is going to send back an HTTP response. That response is going to be this web page that's in this template, but the data that's in there is not going to just be static HTML. It's going to be dynamic HTML, and the data that gets filled in is going to be based on this context. So now from what we know about this context, the data that's going to be filled in on that web page is going to be all of the talks. Because that's, so again, looking at this context construct, it's called talk list. Talk list is all of the talks that are in our database. And so this render function is going to send a web page back with that context data. And so context here, and this could have been sort of named a number of different things, but context is the sort of the term that we use in Django from the idea of, okay, like, yes, there's some data, but you know, in what context do we want to see that data? Or we're going to send you back this template, but what do we want to be in the template? It's that contextual data that really matters. And so this is what we got here. But this cycle by itself, this is the fundamental, these are the fundamental workings of Django. Request comes in, it gets routed to a particular view. That view takes that process, and based on whatever other logic is in the view, it crafts some sort of response to send back to the sender of that request. And that's sort of Django in a nutshell. So we have this view, but so you make this view, and we look at a couple of things here. One, how did the request get to this view? And then two, what is this that's being sent back? And so you still don't quite have anything yet. You still don't have anything that is visible to the viewer. And so when the viewer comes here, they're still just seeing the rocket ship, and only the admin can see things. So we've got this first step down. We've got the logic built, and let me make a change here. So I'm sort of jumping back and forth between computers. And so we've got the logic built. Now we have to change the routing, change the URL so that as that information comes in, it knows to be routed to the proper view. And then we also have to create a template that will be used to send that contextual information back. So let's take a look at let me see. Where am I now? I think I'm on 3.0. Nope, that's not right. No matter what you do, spelling is important. All those spelling lessons you learned as a kid, it's even more important when you're a programmer. Wow. You can check out. There we go. So, what is it? So what do you have here? So Uday's put something in the chat. Django function inside a model, how to call it from a view. Yep. And so, all right. So we've got, again, looking at this, our view, we have this template that we're going to be using here, but the template didn't exist. Now we jump ahead a little bit, and we also have to do some routing. So we have a couple of things here. We look at our urls.py, and then we also have this urls.py in the talks directory. And let me go back. Let's see. So urls.py, close that. This is in our config directory. So the urls.py is in our config directory. It's this file here that I'm hovering over. And again, our config directory is that core directory. If I go back to checking out 3.0, you notice that, so this is the core set of URLs. So what does this tell us? If there's this one URL pattern, and this, again, we talk about the request response cycle. A request comes into Django. This url.py file that is in the config directory tells us what to do with those as they come in. And so we only have one pattern here now, and that is the pattern for admin. So if something comes into our site /admin, then it's going to direct it to this view admins.site.urls. So we haven't looked at this because this is one of the built-in applications that Django provides, and that's why we get this nice admin without having to do anything. It's just built in. But if something just comes into the root directory, we get the startup page. We get the rocket page. Now, if we go to, let me make that there and put that there. So now if we check out, if we move ahead, moving to the 3.1 tag, you'll notice that this file changes, the urls.py file changes because I've added a new path. I've done two things here. So I've done another import. So this path module was already imported. This is what's known as a path object. So these path objects, they do a few things. It takes as an argument, it takes a route. And so again, this first path object we saw on line 20, the route it took was /admin. And so if a request, what this says is if a request comes to /admin, send that request to the admin.site.urls view, which is something built in that we didn't build. I'm going to focus more on this one that I've just added. So here, this is saying if a request comes into the talks route, we want to send it to, well, we want to send it to somewhere else. But I've added this include function. And so as a result, not what I wanted. This include module says to include routes or paths that are in this talks.urls module. So before we just had urls.py that was in a config urls.py, we've now added a urls.py that's in the talks directory. And so by using this include that focuses from the top level, we are able to say, okay, here's the route I want you to use, but I also want you to include things that are in this talks URL. So I can have a specific urls.py or a routing file, also known as it's in the Django terminology, it's called a URL config. I can have a URL config that's specific to my talks application. And so here in my talks application, what do I want? I'm saying from this directory, import views here on line 4, and I'm importing this view and I'm creating a new URL pattern here. And here I've got a link to the documentation about the path module. And so we see the path module here. It takes as arguments a route and a view, and then maybe some keyword arguments. And so, and then it returns an element for an inclusion in this URL patterns construct. And so you'll notice both of these, both URLs, the config.urls and the talks.urls have this URL patterns construct. And that's going to be a list of these, what are called path objects. If you dealt with Django in the past, I believe, again, I can't recall whether this is a Django 2.0 or 3. No, I think it happened in Django 2.0. There used to be, what was it? Like a URL construct here, a URL method, but path is sort of what's used more currently. But if you're looking at an older project, like we've got projects that have sort of a mix and match of both. But let's see. So this, again, returns an element for inclusion in the URL pattern. So this will give you a URL pattern that says, here's the route, here's the view, here's some other variables. So in this case, let's see, let's start from the top. URLs.py, here, the route is admin. The view is this one that we didn't build. Here, the route is talks. The view isn't so much, in this case, it's not a specific view, but it's including this other URL config file. And so it's saying, I want to use the views that are in that other URL config file, the talks.urls config file. And so we go to, so if a request comes into talks, I want to use the views that are in the talks.urls file. Well, what views are, what routes and views are there? Here in the talks.urls file, the path is an empty string. And so that means if it just comes to our site/talks, and then the view that gets used is this views.listView, in which we've imported here on line 4. So we imported it on line 4. And this is the view that I want to use. I want to use this list view. And I've given this URL pattern a name. And that will become important a little later. We'll see why that's useful. So what does that mean? What it means is if someone comes to our site and goes to the talks directory, then I want this view. I want Django to use this view, this list view, views.listView, and this is the one we've just been looking at. And this list view is going to return a list of all the talks that we have. And so again, so this is just sort of that fundamental request response cycle of Django. Let's see, what do we have here? Question in the chat. Yours are the difference between referencing the module directly versus using the include function. So let's see. So you could do a thing where you could try to sort of point at the module directly. It makes things a little more brittle. Using the include function here gives you the option to say, okay, you know what? It's sort of a decoupling thing. So I don't necessarily, you don't care about the details of how that all gets sorted out. You're going to let talks.urls sort that out. And so what that does is it allows me to change things here in my application specific URL config file without the main URL config file having to be concerned with those details. What is the role of cookie in Django? Let's see. The role of a cookie in Django is the same as it is with any other web application. I guess I may not be entirely clear on the question. There's nothing sort of specific or magic about cookies in Django that's different from any other web application. It's used for the same purposes for keeping track of information, things of that nature. Let's see. All right, so again, so let me just make sure I'm clear on this process. So we've got this urls.py at the root for our config. So it's looking for something to either go to the admin or to go to the talks route. If it goes to the talks route, if it goes to the admin route, we've seen what that does. If it goes to the talks route, then it's going to look for options from talks.urls. And so the only pattern we have now is one for just going to the root of the talks application, and that's going to use this list view. And so if we go back to the core Django site and hit refresh, you get a 404 page not found. And so before you can actually get a thing to show up here, you have to have, again, we talked about, so you got your request, you need this template and then a context to send it to. So we need a template So we look here in this templates directory. So this is something that was new created when I moved from tag 3.0 to 3.1. The templates you create a separate templates directory in the same root directory as your project. So you see config, talks, and templates are all at the same level. And then within that templates directory, you have templates for your specific applications. And then we have this talk list here. And so this template, this is just a blank text template here. And where should I write conversational questions? Some, yes, those should be in views. Your conversational function should be in views. So a strange thing happens when you add a path here to your URL config.py, to the config.urls. Once you have something other than just the admin, going to the home page itself gives it 404 because it's like, there's not a home page defined. So if I comment out this line, now we've got our rocket page back. But once you start adding other routes, Django's upset. And it's like, well, no, like you don't have a home page defined. I can't find it. And if you look at the error message, and this is one of the nice things about Django, especially with debug mode set to true. Let me go here. So by default, you see here on line 26, Django has this debug mode set to true when you first set up a Django project, because if you're building a new Django project, then you'll want to debug it. Now notice, and again, most of the stuff that was here, Django does for you. So Django is trying to help you. It's trying to help you as much as it can. On line 25, security warning, do not run with debug turned on in production. So that is a warning, don't do that. But by default, you start a new project, it's set to true. And one of the things that does is it gives you helpful messages. And so it will tell you, page not found, using the URL conf defined in config.urls, that's what we were just looking at. Django tried these URL patterns in this order, admin / and talk /. And if we go back and look at our config.url, let me close that. That's what we've got, admin /. Those are the URL patterns in that URL patterns, which is a list of URL patterns. It tried admin and it tried talks, but it didn't find anything that matched just the root directory. The empty path didn't match any of these. So at this point, we don't have a home page for our application. We're going to fix that later on. I'm going to just leave that as it is for now. But what we have done is we've created this new route. So we've seen admin. We've used admin, this 127 site, colon 800 admin. So we've seen the admin, but now we have a new option for talks. And so we should see talks. And now, so when we go to the talks directory, we see this hello. And why is that there? Because the template that I created, this talk list, talk_list.html, this template is just a text file that just says hello. And again, with the request response cycle, a request comes in, it goes to the talks route. The talks route includes the talks URL config, and from there, that looks at the path there. Says, okay, well, if you come into the root talks route, use this list view. And when I go to the list view, it says, okay, well, I'll take that request. I'll grab the objects. I'll grab all the talks. And then I'm going to render them. I'm going to render all that talk information here in this context. I'm going to render them through this talk list HTML template. This is the template I'm going to use. However, this is a terrible template. It's just one word. It's just a word in text. And so it's just going to give us back this plain text. So I put this in here just to sort of to demonstrate that the cycle is working as expected. We've gone to this route. We send an HTTP request to this route, and just going to that URL is the HTTP request. It's Django has processed a response as it's expected, and it sent us back this response. It's just not a great response. To give us the response that we're probably expecting, we need to improve the template. And so, if we go to point 2, we will see that we now have a better template. And this is where we get into the Django templating language. If you have used Jinja or something like that, the languages are similar. Let's see. Did I? No, I thought I. That's not what I want. I want that. No, I didn't. Okay. Let me go here. And so again, the templating language is much more complex than I can go into in tremendous detail here. But here's some of the fundamentals. So here's our first template, and again, Django using this model template view approach. Let's see. Let me look at these questions here in chat. Cookie, Django, MVC. Yeah, Django. Yeah, MVT or so MVC is what people are for Usman and Varun. People are familiar with hearing the MVC description. Django technically uses MVT. People will often say MTV simply because it matches up with the MVC. MVC model view controller. The model is the same. The view in MVC is what we call templates in Django. So it actually the visual display. And then the C, the controller in MVC, is where the logic happens. In Django, that's MTV. So model, the T, the template that we're looking at now, is the visual display, and then the V, the view, is where the actual logic takes place. And so what we're looking at now here is the T part, the template. Nope, no, that's the view. There we go. The template. And so, so we've got a simple template here, and the templates are this combination of HTML, and then you've got tag. There's sort of 4 key components. You've got variables, filters, tags, and comments. If we're looking here, Django template language, and there we go. So I'm going to focus on variables and tags here. So variables, again, variables look like this. So you've got a variable is 2 curly braces, a space, then the variable, space, then 2 curly braces. And that lets you take a variable, a Python variable, just like you would be accustomed, just like you'd be used to working with, and do things with it. So this template, it's sort of a space holder, and let's just fill it in with this context. And so again, here in the view, where we pull these objects out of our talk model, that's this context that gets past this talk list. And so when we render this template on line 12 with this context that we built on line 11, that's what's happening. This context is called, it's a dictionary talk list, and its value is the talk list construct we built. When we come and look at this talk list.html template, we see a few things. Here on lines 1 and 2, lines 1 and 3, we have these tags. Here the tags aren't doing a huge amount. They're just sort of, identifying this is a title, and then lines 3 and 11 are saying where the blocks are, where the content block is. And line 1 is defining the title block. And then here, content. But now, if you're familiar with HTML, you'll notice a mix here. So we've got, for instance, on line 1, we have the H1, the headers, header 1. But now here in line 6, let's see, line 5 and 9, we've got this unordered list. And so we're creating an HTML construct, but inside that, what do we want to happen? And here we see this, the first sort of power of the templating language. And so the templates, you've got a curly bracket and %, space, and then your tag language, and then a closing %, curly bracket. So here, this is this is just standard simple Python. So for talk in talk list, and so the talk list, that list of talks that we generated before, what do you want to do? So for talk in talk list, again, HTML, this list item, and then you want this variable. And so for each talk in talk list, you want talk.talk title, and then you just the semicolon for spacing, and then you want the Twitter handle. And so what this is going to do, this should give us a list of our talks. For every talk that we have in our database, it should show us the talk title and the Twitter handle for that talk. And it will just build an unordered list like that. And that's it. So this is our template. And if we go back to our talk site and refresh, ta-da. So now with a template that's not just the word hello, a template that actually is a dynamic template that can process data, that can actually handle the data we're sending to it in the context, this is what we get. So again, that request response cycle, let me see how we're doing on time. 10, all right. With that request response cycle, I keep forgetting I've got 9 to 12 in my head, but I'm in central time, so it's different here. I'm 8 to 11. So we've got that request response where a request comes in to the talks URL. That request gets routed through through config.urls to talks.urls, and talks.urls tells it, oh, okay, if it came to the root of this, use this list view function. Use this view called list view. And the list view says, oh, okay, you sent me this request. I'm going to take that request. I'm going to grab all the talks out of the talk database and put them into this context thing. And then I'm going to render this template, that I've got. And I'm going to render that template with the data from this context. And boom, I'm pointing that way, but because for me, the screen is there. What you get is what you see on the screen. You get the list of lightning talks. And so, and actually this is not good. Let me change this. And let me I'm going to change this to first name. This, again, just sort of doing the stuff on the fly. Because I changed, I don't know why I changed it to the sort of showing the Twitter handle. Oh, you know what? So it's also important that you pay attention to your models and know what your models are. I don't have a field called first name in my model. I have a field called personal name in my model because I'm too clever for my own good. There we go. So now we have this list of talks. So that's the talk title and the speaker. And so that's, interesting, but what you would really want someone to be able to do when they came to this page is to be able to like click on that talk and get some more information about it. And so for that, we're gonna move on and see how to actually get that done. But let's see, let me pause here and see if so I see folks have been asking questions in the chat and some of you have been answering them, and that's fantastic. Let me sort of pause here and see if there are any sort of burning questions anyone has, because at this point, these are sort of the basic fundamentals of the Django request response loop. So anyone have any sort of burning questions that they want to have addressed or jump into? I'm going to drink some water. All right, and then if everyone is answered correctly, yes, computational functions, yes, should be written in views. Let's rewrite your logic. That is correct. All right, so so we have this view that gives us a list of all the talks, and that's great. But we want is to be able to see we want people who use the site to be able to see the details of the talk. Again, as the admin, we can see the details, and that's cool for us, but we want the rest of the world to be able to see those details as well. Maybe not these specific details, but we want them to be able to see more info about the talks. And so for that, we are going to need, here we go. We're going to need another view. So we have this list view, but we need something that's going to show us detail about each talk. And so for that, we're going to move. So notice the views.py, I've added this detail view. And I've also changed the name of the talk, changed the name of the list view. I like to use the convention, and I think we do this at our company, and it becomes maybe, again, not an industry standard, but it's just sort of useful. This view is called talk list view. So model name and then description of the view. So here's a view for my talk model, a list view of a talk model. This new one that I've added, it's the talk model, but a detail view. And so what this view does is it returns a single talk. The list view returns a full talk, the full list of all the talks. This one returns a single talk. And so again, I've got a link here to the docs about getting a single object. Here, this single talk, the logic is very similar. You've got the talk model dot objects dot get. And so before we had talk.objects.all that return all the objects, here we have .get, and we're getting a specific thing, and we're getting it by ID. And so notice the parameters for this view are slightly different. It's the same request, but we also have an ID parameter. We need some way to identify the specific talk. And remember when we looked at there we go. At the migrations, all these talks, and I'm referring to them as talks because that's sort of what they are logically. In the Django parlance, each talk is what's known as a model instance, or it's a row in the database. So each model instance has a specific ID. And so to be able to show the details for a specific talk, I need the model ID for that talk. And so here in this view, the request, the view needs the ID, and it will get that specific. And again, back to the question about managers, every model is going to have a manager. This objects is going to be the manager. So the manager has this function get, and it can get a talk by a specific ID or by other or by other attributes. Here we're using ID, and again, I would point you to the documentation as far as all the different things you can do with managers here. So the context, again, is going to be this talk. The key is talk. The value is single talk, the single talk object that we've gotten. And now we're going to, again, it's that same request response cycle. We're going to render this context of the single talk through this new template called talk detail HTML, which I have also created here. And so let's take a look at that. And so this is that template similar to the last one. The difference being when I'm sending it that context of talk, I'm going to show talk.title and then talk.personal name, talk.family name. And then I've got a link here back to talks, back to the list of talks. So a couple of things here. So here's our new template. Here's our new view. The question then is, how do we get to that talk? We need another route. And so we go here to urls.py, talks.urls, the URL configuration for talks. We notice we have a new path here that we didn't have before. This one, again, the pattern is route and then view and then a name. And we've got a name for this URL pattern. We're about to see why those names are important. So here, the route is using this thing in curly brackets. It's called a path converter. And let me grab that. And so the path converters are useful in that Let's see, and I may just, in the interest of time, I may stop showing you every single bit of documentation I come across. Again, I included those links to the docs in the code repo so you can look at those at your leisure. But these path converters, they're designed to help you grab things out of a URL. So here, this path converter is int, matches 0 or any positive integer, returns an int. What does that mean for our purposes? What it means is, here in this talks.urls, if you go to the talks route, site/talks with an empty string, it's going to use a list view. If you go to site/talks/some integer, which is the ID of the talk, it's going to use this talk detail view. And that talk detail view, as we just saw, is going to, two things. It's going to use this talk detail view, but this converter here on line, in the first part of line 12 inside the angle brackets, it's going to return the integer that is that ID. So if you go to site/talk/2, this converter that we see is going to return the integer 2 as a keyword argument. And so the keyword will be ID, the name of the variable, and the value will be 2, which is the ID for that item. So it's going to pass that as a keyword argument to our talk detail view. And when we get to the view, we see that it's looking for a request and an ID. So that ID is going to get passed along, and that's the ID that if in this example 2, that 2 will get used here on line 18. So we'll say, okay, for single talk, talk.objects.get, get me talk number 2, give me object with the ID of 2. And then it will put that into the context and render that through this talk detail template. And so again, the same request response cycle. So if we have here, this is still just working as expected, showing us all the talks. But what if I want, let's see, I'm going to cheat. And let's see, I can't remember. Let's see. Okay, so I know I've got 4 talks. So this is me sort of cheating as the admin. I know I've got 4 talks. I know that this I'm the MVP is the one I just created here. So it's the 4th one. So if I go to talks/4, I should expect to see this I'm the MVP talk. So let's go to talks/4. I'm the MVP by J1, which is just what we've got here. But let's talk about J1. Talks 3 is the Overwatch show I'm so excited by Jeff Kaplan. And so we have this working now, so that if we go to a specific, to the route of a specific talk, it will give us the details for that talk. Now, when we named the URLs earlier, we've got a URL patterns here. So we have the route, the view they're using, and then this name. This name is helpful because if we look at our talk detail, I can use this URL tag and say here, this again, so this is another tag where some of the logic happens, just like here in the talk list on line 6, this logic happens here in this tag, for talk in talk list. Here in the talk detail template on line 8, there's this logic of URL. So for URL, talk list, so I can give it a link that goes to the URL called talk list because I've named that URL pattern talk list. And that's where these names become important, because you want to be able to use them in certain places to refer to a specific URL pattern instead of having to hard code it or figure it out each time or what have you. And so since in my talk detail template, I've got this URL here that will take me back to the talk list for each individual talk that I see. So again, it fills in this information and this information from the context, and then it gives me a link back to the talks list. And so that's working a certain way, but do we really expect our users to know the individual IDs of the talks? Well, no, that's not helpful. So we're going to have to fix that. But again, so this is sort of the first step in showing that, okay, we can actually get these talk details to show up. But what we really want is we want them selectable from here, from our overall list. And we do this. Let's see. If there's a question. Someone asked, is there a way to have a tested loop inside Django template? Let me explain the name parameter and path. Oh, okay, well, there we go. Just explain the name parameter path. Tested loop inside Django template. I'm not sure what you mean by tested loop, Soham. There are, let's see, and I'm not covering testing here, but there are definitely ways to test your pages and to test your views. You can also test your models. There are a number of different things you can test, and so that you can test to your heart's content, for lack of a better term. Oh, nested loops. Ah, okay. Well, yeah, nested loops. Yes, so the nested loops would be similar to, let's see, how to say, similar to the way you would do them in Python and HTML. It's just, this is just a simple example. And so if I had a more complex data structure, we're looking at this talk list, if I had a more complex data structure, it would be a similar process. So let's say, so here talk is, let's say if I wanted to iterate for every talk, if I wanted to iterate through every subfield that talk had, I could do that here. I could say, you know, for item in talk or something like that. But it's basically, it's very similar to Python, just with some extra syntax because of the template. Let's see, where am I doing here? One. All right, so there are two issues that we have left here, and actually, let me go back. So, okay, so there are two problems. One problem I've shown you, one problem that I haven't shown you. So let me go back and show you the other problem. So one problem is, okay, so we have, one problem is like we don't have anything linked here, and that's not super helpful. So so this site, while mildly informative, not terribly helpful, I can go to talk to, and that's cool, but I've got 4 talks. What if somebody wants talk 5? Somebody's clever, like, aha, I want a 5th talk. Well, does not exist. So you get this big, angry, ugly error. Nobody wants that. And you also still have the issue of you don't have a home page. And so we're going to fix both of these issues. So we have 2 issues. One is this, the lack of a home page, and then also this ugly error message that we don't want. So we're going to fix first. I end up fixing the error message. No, that's not what I want. The error message first. So we don't want that. That doesn't work. And so the way we fix that is by making a slight change. Let me do this again. A slight change to our talk detail view. And so if we go, and hopefully that's still legible. So if we check out the 4.0 tag, we had, to get the single talk, we're using this talk.objects.get, and we're getting it by a specific ID. But that gives us that error issue, that ugly error, if you pick an ID that is out of range. So to fix that, we're going to change that talk detail view so that it instead uses, instead of talk.objects.get by a specific ID, we're going to use this other function called getObjectOr404. And so this is another, and again, I got a link here to the docs. GetObjectOr404 is something that lets you get a specific object, but if that object doesn't exist, it will return a specific 404 response, error response. The key to doing that, because let's see, what do we have here? It's, you know, it's like does not exist. It's like, I don't have anything. With this change, this getObjectOr404, it will either find the object you're looking for by ID. You'll notice the syntax is different. So instead of talk.object.get, it's getObjectOr404, and then you have to give it the name of the model and the ID still. So what this does is it will either find the object that you're looking for, or it will return a specific 404 response. 404, the HTTP response for a page not being found. That is important because that gives you some extra flexibility and options as far as how things are handled. And so by doing this, if I refresh this, now I go to page 5. All right, so we couldn't find the language. So I've cheated a little bit here. There are a couple of things I didn't show you. Let's see. Go to 4. So if I go to, let's say talk lemon. So if there's no talk lemon, that's not even a right ID. And so it couldn't find that object. And so it's in the background, it's generating a 404 response. Actually, I should be able to show you that. There you go. So can you see that? Let me move that up. So can you all see in my terminal window, can you all see here at the bottom, this the last line? So like these last 3 lines, is that visible to you all? Thumbs up. Okay, so so these are the last 3 things I did. I did this, you know, get talks 5, and it's telling me it sent back a 404, and that's how long the message was. So a 404 error, did not find, and then I went to talks 4, which is my last talk. It found that a 200 response, and then I went to talk lemon, and it didn't find that. It got a 404. So this getObjectOr404 is making sure that if I don't find what I'm looking for, instead of just giving an error that says, "Oh, I'm broken," it is giving me a specific 404 response. One nice thing about that is it lets me decide how I respond to a 404. I'm able to create a new template. So here in my templates directory, you may not have noticed that this changed, but instead of just, so here in my templates directory, I have my talks directory, and I have the talk detail and talk list templates, but I also have this 404.html template that I've created in the root of that templates directory, and it's another dynamic template. And let me just do this. Let me just say nope. So I'm just going to change that to nope. And so now, oh, hold on, that'll take a second to. Oh wait, I might have. Oh, that's right. Okay, made a bunch of changes here. So the getObject404 lets me create a custom 404 page, but for that to work, I also had to make some changes to settings. I had to change debug to false instead of true as it was before. And then when you have debug set to false, you have to add something to allowed hosts. So one of the side effects of changing debug to false, and let's see, the details around those setting changes are in the docs, because that is a little non-obvious. Let me go get bigger. There we go. No, I want views. Here we go. So some of the details around this are in the docs. So get object 404. It raises a 404 exception instead of a does not exist. So we saw that does not exist error before, but now with this, it raises a 404 error. That will take you, here we go. And so that will allow you to show a customized HTML. So, but in order to show customized HTML when Django returns a 404, you can create this template and place it in the top, but it will only be served when debug is set to false. And so, and then you'll find out later that when you set debug to false, that also means you have to change your allowed hosts. And so let me set this to true. But a side effect of debug being set to false is that the auto refresh does not work as well. So let's see. Okay, so page 404 not found. So so when that's there, it's not found. Let me do this. Okay, so now I've refreshed it. And so now, so my template, that 404 template that I use just says nope. And so that's, again, not super duper helpful, but just sort of showing what's happening. But I point that out to say that your 404 template can be whatever you want it to be. What you really want it to be is something useful like this. And so here it's saying we could not find that lightning talk. Let's see. Let me have to toggle this again. Let me do that. There we go. And so, again, looking at templates, we have, the block title. It's mostly text, but then we have this, again, the URL talk list. And so I've got this hard-coded text. We couldn't find that lightning talk. And then a link back to the list of talks. This URL on line 5, the URL tag, is using the named pattern talk list. And so it's sending you back there. And so this fixes things such that if someone just types in a wrong thing, it will say, okay, I couldn't find that lightning talk. It'll take you back to the talks list. One unintended side effect of this is that it does that for any 404 error. So it kind of gives us a default homepage of we could not find lightning talk. So notice if I just go to the root, we couldn't find that lightning talk. And so that's kind of thing, but that's not exactly what we want. But let's go back to the talks list. So we fixed the 404 error, but we still have the issue of we can't get to our individual talks. So that's what we're going to fix next. I'm going to close this. Close settings.py. Talk detail. Yeah, leave that there. All right, and so for that, we're going to need to change our model. And all right, so we've got these here in URLs.talks. We've got these named patterns. So talk list and talk detail. Talk detail is the URL pattern for a specific talk. And so we've seen how these named URL patterns can be helpful, being able to reverse back to talk list or to use the URL tag to get back to talk list. Now we're going to use that something similar but for talk detail. And so we're going to look at our model. And so what we want to do is, for our model to be able to know its URL. We want each model instance or each talk to know what its URL is, so we can then add that to our, there you go. So we can add that to our talk list. So we can add that URL to our talk list. So we've got talk list here. in models that we've seen before. Now, when I check out 4.2, you're going to notice from lines 26 on, we'll get new code. Let's see. No, I don't want that. Oh, I don't know what happened. All right. Yep. Spelling is important. The bane of programmers everywhere. All right, so now when we move to this next tag, you notice I've added this new model, not new model, a new method to the model. And so this method, get absolute URL, it returns the canonical URL of an instance. And so what this does is it uses this reverse method, and it uses the named URL pattern, talk detail, and then the keyword argument it takes is ID, and that value is self.id. So it's going to be the ID of the model instance. So it's going to take the ID of that model instance, and it's going to use that along with this talk detail named URL that we see. Here we go. This talk detail named URL. And so it's going to create a URL for that specific model instance. So for a talk with the ID of 2, it's going to create a URL that goes to site/talk/2. And for talk number 4, it'll do the same thing, and so on and so forth. And so this is one change that we needed to make. And then our talk list template gets changed a little bit so that we've got the same unordered list, but now for each talk, we've still got talk title and the Twitter handle, but we're using this tag. We're using an anchor, an href here, talk.get absolute URL. So it's going to be filling in that absolute URL as the anchor. So refresh here. So now we have our list of talks, and each one links to the specific talk. And again, the details that show up are going to be different depending on what we have in our talk detail template. And so now what we have is a site where when we go to the talks page, we get a list of all the talks, and then we can drill down on the individual talks that we want to see. And then it'll take us back to the talks page. Let me see. Okay. All right, so let me take a look at the chat. Where did my chat go? Here we are. And there we are. Let me take a look at some questions here. Nested loops, DRF, Django REST framework. Safe to pass ID in URL. In terms of security, is it safe to pass ID in URL? Oh, there we go. So people are saying already. Something. Yeah. And so for this example, again, this is a very simplified example. I'm passing the ID in the URL just because it's a very simplified example, and we've got 4 objects. That's sometimes not knowing what you do, but then there are times where you will pass an ID in the URL. For instance, if you go to YouTube, if you're looking to say a video on YouTube, each video will have YouTube. There we go. This is something I'm gonna point out to you all later. So this is my coworker Lacey. This is her giving a talk on using Docker with Django that I'll point you all to later. But so this, you'll have this, watch v equals, and so these are the IDs, of a particular thing. And so sometimes, you will, like, if you're sharing this with somebody, that's the link that gets shared that has the ID in the URL, because you want to go directly to this instance. I keep pointing like you all can see. You want to see this particular instance in the database. You want to see this particular talk. And so that is the thing that happens sometimes. It's realistically not practical to expect someone to come to your site and to know the idea of the talk. And so what we want is this situation that we have now, where people can click on these links. Okay, let's see. Let me go back to this and to that. So this is really sort of the bulk of what I have for you all today. Let me see, we've got a couple minutes left. Let me look at one last thing. What did I do here? Don't really have time to go over that.
Actually, Kojo, if anybody wanted to ask you questions, they could feel free to unmute too.
That's true. Yeah. So let me see. So if people sort of have burning questions, they can unmute. Let me show you all one last thing. But so this is, again, a very basic functioning Django application. Again, I have focused on, and let me sort of go through what I focused and also what I did not cover, because there are a lot of other things that I could have covered that I didn't. So I tried to focus on the core logic as far as the Django request response cycle, because that's really what your Django application, your most fundamental Django application is going to be doing. There are lots of things that can be built on top of that, and lots of logic that can be much more complex than, I've got relatively simple logic here. I've got two views, I have one model, I have two views, two templates. The logic is relatively simple, but the idea is, you should be able to, you can build on that and expand upon that, but you can't really do anything unless you can do the things here in these, unless you can make a model and get it to return some information. So those are sort of the fundamentals. Some of the things I didn't talk about. I didn't talk about class-based views, which are fairly popular in Django. One reason I specifically didn't talk about those, there's a little bit about class-based views in the repos, but I didn't talk about class-based views because they can get sort of magical. So for instance, like this, if we're looking here at lines 7 through 12, to replace this with a class-based view, you could it's just like one line of code. It's like model equals talk. And then, so you can use like a list view class, and then you say model equals talk, and and then it just does everything for you. And that's fantastic. But if you're new to Django and are trying to learn Django, I think it's important to understand what's actually happening under the hood. And so this is what's happening with Django. An HTTP response, a request comes in, it gets routed a certain way, and you can tell it where the routing is by config.urls or by your application.urls, and then that gets routed to a particular view, and then that logic happens, and then that view uses this logic, creates an HTTP response, and sends that back to the requester. So it's class-based views. I didn't talk about that. I did not talk about users and users creating talks, because that would seem like the next logical step. It's like, okay, well, this is cool, Kojo, but how do people sign up for talks? I didn't talk about users and user management, partially because Django includes user functionality and user management. It's not super complex, but it's a little more complex. But I will point you to some resources in the document that I'll add to the repo. There's a man named Will Vincent who's written 3 different books on Django, and he has some excellent tutorials on working with users. The short version being, if you're creating a user, you almost always want to, Django gives you a user model. You almost never want to use that. You almost always want to create your own custom user model. It could be very similar to the default user model, but again, I wanted to sort of focus on some of the core stuff here. So I'll have links to that. I will also have links to Lacey's talk on using Docker with Django. I know Docker is very popular. I didn't focus on that. And I also didn't talk about testing or any of the styling and that sort of thing. So, you're talking on forms.py? No, I will not be, SOCAM. So yeah, if folks, as we're time sort of winding down, if folks have questions.
I have one question.
Yeah.
And it may be beyond the scope of this, but I was curious about migrations and what happens if you change your data model.
Ah, okay.
You change the type of a column. Say you want to keep the values you've got, but it's going to be a different sort of column in the database.
Oh, okay, different column. Okay, so the short answer is if you make any changes to your data model, to the actual fields, and I'm putting in chat the link to the repo. If you make a change to any of your actual fields in your model, then yes, you need to do migrations. And so your concern is sort of saving the data, like keep sort of.
Yeah, so you're not just dropping a column, but I don't know, you're taking a string and making it a longer data type or something.
Okay, so and I forget the term. I mean, I just had a conversation with Frank about this like a week or two ago. But there's this sort of a data migration process. I can't remember the term, but there's a situation where you need to sort of like depending on the changes happening, you might need to like take your data out of the old database. It can be done, but it's sort of like a multi-step process. So you might want to, for the sake of data safety integrity, maybe copy the data out of that database and then do the change in the model and then make the migration and then run the migration and then bring that data back. The specifics will vary based on how the data is being changed. So for instance, like if you're changing, say, a float to a string, that might be more easily done than, say, changing a string back to a float, or changing like a float to an int that's going to have a certain size or whatever. But it's sort of like a side load type thing.
Yeah. So basically, it's a manual. It's something I have to work out and put into the migration script. It's not something that Django does for me.
Yeah. Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
I've been using this language called PHP. So it has a framework, Laravel. So
yes.
Between Laravel and Django, which one of them is more faster and easy to use?
Let's see. That's going to be sort of the subject of sort of flame wars. I would say, and a lot of it depends on your background knowledge. So I used Drupal a long time ago, written in PHP. I use Django because I prefer Python as a language. The Python language, for me, is syntactically cleaner. It's easier to work with. As far as faster, as far as performance, that's going to vary quite a bit based on your application specifically. But Python and PHP, performance-wise, they're both high-level languages, so they're going to be pretty close. They're going to be pretty equivalent. So that is all the time that we have for today. So I don't want to hold anybody up from other stuff or other parts of the conference. So thank you all for your time. You can find my Twitter information on my GitHub repo, and if you have questions and things of that nature. But thank you very much for your time this morning, and I hope it was helpful.
Thank you.